the assessment vehicle. So
You and I on the picture and I'm like, oh yeah,
What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Courtney Dudek.
Oh, we talked on the phone recently.
Yeah,
Over that listing.
yeah, so nice to meet you in person. Yeah, I imagine there will be some interesting questions, and I don't know if I have all the answers. We're all kind of in the same boat at the moment with that, but I will talk about just listings in general and hopefully have time for questions, and if there's specific things that you guys want to talk about, we can also talk about those things, because you know, I've taught a lot of listing classes in my day, but things are changing, so even looking at paperwork right now is futile because it's gonna change soon. Not all of it, and I don't think there will be any major changes to the exclusive right to sell, but it certainly will change a little bit.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I have problems with like specialized properties.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a like, it's regular, little house, whatever condition, like 3 beds, 2 baths, you can find the comps, you can do, it's so easy to price and do all the things, but like,
Yeah.
when you got like a Victorian in a low income area, you're like, nobody wants this, how do you sell this?
Right.
That's where I struggle.
Yeah, whatever happened with your,
So I
Can you
was
talk
literally, yesterday I had set the photography, cause I know the guy personally, like I was a correction officer before I had this job, so that's who it is. And all of a sudden he calls me, he's like, Erin, I just wanna be upfront now, cause I'm so sorry, but like a guard was talking and this young couple wants to
just
buy
gotta
it,
buy it.
private sale. I'm like, oh my god, and then he's like, I'm gonna make it right, I'm gonna pay you, you know, he was saying all the right things, and I'm like, you want me to do the paperwork, I will for a discount rate, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Cause I want something, but
Right.
it's just, yeah, so super.
Yeah,
Super sorry.
figuring out how to
Just,
broker
yeah.
a private sale to get, to get some commission out of it, and also to be able to help them, so it actually
Can
happens.
you represent a seller if they don't want it listed? Like, let's say they like this private sale, can you do it without officially listing it, or is that like a no-no?
Yeah.
You can.
Yes,
Okay.
You can do that, you have to, yeah.
It's not like a pocket
You
listing,
can-
it wouldn't be.
No, you can broker a private sale, and you can even have it put in the MLS for comp purposes. And you may have seen some, I just saw one recently, I wish I had kept track of what address it was. Oh, I know where it is,
Okay.
I know where it is, and it basically, it's a listing that's put in, and it says for comparable purposes only, it wasn't actually ever sold, and it was crazy what it sold for, cause it was way less than any of
Of
my,
course, yeah.
way less than any of the other comps for this house that I was comping, so.
This guy is such a nice guy. He wants to sell to a fellow guard who's like
Sure.
a young couple, and he's
Sure.
getting more than he even would want.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
great.
which is
great.
great.
I'm so happy for
But
you.
if you-
I mean, I'm happy for it, but it just.
Yeah, you can do even listing paperwork with him. And have him, that doesn't, and have it just say no MLS entry or whatever you want, and then just whatever your commission you want for it, so that it's actually official that you're representing him, if you wanna do that too.
Like in the process of
So-
having, they were like those people that like wouldn't sign online, they're like, oh, we're gonna print it out, and I'm like, I can print it out, I mean, I can bring it to you.
Yeah,
And it just, yeah, like, oh, by the way, but at least, you know, they weren't those people that are gonna ghost you and just not let you know what's going on. He was very like, listen, this is what happened, I wasn't trying to put it out there, it's just.
yeah,
this is
word of
what
mouth.
happened.
Which is,
Yeah,
you know, and that's an interesting conversation with people in this market. I mean, people decide to do private sales for various reasons. You know, this guy obviously has a soft spot for a fellow guard, all of that, great. There's people that I deal with, a lot of senior clients, and there's a lot of times seniors would be perfectly happy with a private sale because they have too much stuff, they don't wanna have to deal with all of what it's gonna take to get it listed, so they feel like I'm gonna, you know, a private sale would be fine, but I always have the conversation with the seller that, listen, in this market, my advice to you is to put it on the public market, because you're gonna get more money, but
That's
if
what I
money's
think too.
not the driving factor, which in this case isn't
that was
necessarily.
what I couldn't
Right.
sell, I'm like,
Yeah.
well, you know, it's like, I'm happy for you, you know, but
Yeah.
it's like, I'll pay you, I said, the biggest payback you can do is if another person's looking to buy or sell, please
Yeah.
just pass me the
Yeah,
email out there.
have
He's
sure.
like, oh, I absolutely will.
Yeah, So yeah, so that's that's an interesting conversation because you want people to, obviously, people are gonna do things and have different reasons and money's not the major driver. And it sounded like, for him, he was getting what he wanted
Yeah,
anyway, right?
yeah,
Now, what he could have potentially gotten might have been significantly more than that,
Mhm.
we assume by creating the competition, especially with the market being the way it is. But it's hard,
and I said, listen, if
It's
you
hard to
want somebody to update you and keep you on timelines, because the lawyers won't, I was like, I'm just
Yeah.
being honest, I said, ask me how I know, but
Right.
like, I'll do the paperwork and at least,
Yeah.
earn
Yeah, and you can
something.
tell him, and say, especially if he's willing to make it right with you, say, well, I'll broker the deal for you and we'll just do it for a reduced commission, since,
Right,
you didn't have any of the cost associated with listing it, right?
Right.
Because you haven't invested any money in the listing
Mhm.
yet, so,
right,
yeah.
exactly.
yeah. All right, is this started?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I'm not used to Zoom and in person, it's always so interesting. And I guess if you guys are on Zoom and you have questions, I'll do my best to peek at the monitor, but go ahead and type a question in there or send Kim a text because she's sitting in the back of the room. In case I get, we get onto a topic and I don't look at it. So yeah, when Kim and I initially talked about this class, you guys have lots of amazing training that's available. And I know that, one of the pieces of listing is a CMA, which I know there's a class. Isn't that coming up with Rob soon?
Mhm.
Yes, right?
Yep.
So I'm not gonna do a deep dive into a CMA or how to do a CMA with this. I will talk a little bit about pricing because obviously that's a piece of listing. I made some notes about the things that I would touch on in a class related to listings. Some of you are newer than others. Some of you are, maybe haven't been doing this with KW very long. I will tell you sort of just things that I think are important when it comes to listings, and then if there's specific situations or questions, there's always such good learning that comes from the Q&A and of real life experience, like you said, you had a question, and things like that. I think there's invaluable learning that comes from that, more than me standing up here like a talking head. So, couple things related to listings, I think, one of the things that's always been true about listings is it's very different than working with buyers. It's a very different type of client, and I think people sell houses for a lot of different reasons. And for those of you who've been in my class before, it's interesting because the market has changed. So the caveat to my usual list of why people sell houses is some people are just wanting to capitalize on the market now, which 10 years ago when I was talking about listings, that wasn't necessarily the case. That wasn't a reason why people are selling. But what are some of the things that you guys can think of for reasons why people are listing houses aside from that reason, which is obviously prevalent right now?
Family growth.
Family growth,
Downside.
downsizing,
Death.
death,
Divorce.
yeah, job changes, job transfers. Yeah, some of those things. And one of the things I find in my experience is, I would say, and I have no percentage to put on it, but a greater percentage of the people that I work with that are selling their house, it's for a more emotional and not necessarily a fun reason. A lot of people, when they're buying houses, it's a different story. You're working with buyers and they're, especially first time buyers, it's like, yay, you give them their keys for the first time and that's so exciting. And I think for listings, it's definitely a much more of a mixed bag of emotion that comes with it. And I think you're dealing with people that have lived in a house for years and years and they can't, can't comprehend moving out of it. That's one thing. Has anybody ever had somebody that they have worked with who has been so emotionally attached to the house that it's taken a long time to get them to the place where they're ready to list their house.
I have one right now.
Right now, you have it right now. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. It's an apartment, it's a house that she lived in, the mother had passed away, and
Okay.
she's been trying to clean this house out for over a year,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and that is just such a hard thing, and that's such a different side of our business than the fun of going and looking at pretty houses. And now, let's be honest, the buyer business right now is very challenging, and buyers are defeated a lot, right? Because of what's going on in our market. So certainly that's not all fun either anymore, but it used to be that was much more of a fun part of the business compared to some of the sad things that you hear on the listing side, right? Getting divorced, I mean, that's always interesting. Anybody dealt with that one yet? Yeah, were the people working well together, selling the house amicable? Okay, we had one that was so bad, the husband, like, he went off on her while we were standing there, and Jordan, my listing assistant at the time, was just like, we literally were just so embarrassed for her that he just literally ripped her up and down and swearing, and we're just like, okay, so we're gonna bring this back to the business. And it was just so awful. So that kind of stuff definitely happens. I think one of the biggest things that I can say from listing, just making sure there's nothing there. Working with sellers is really understanding their why and making sure that that's something that you don't brush over, and that you are very, take the time to explore and understand with them, because again, it can be, a lot of times it can be something that's pretty emotional, and you want to be seen by them as a partner in what they're trying to do, and somebody that's here to help them. So that's, that's a big piece. And when it comes to the listing consultation, the meeting that I have with sellers, spending some time on that conversation is super, a super important part of that. So as I was breaking this down, the things that I thought of that we might want to touch on today are listing material or listing collateral. Like, what does what do you have that's your presentation for listing? A listing consultation, what goes into that? Obviously the commission conversation is part of that consultation. And then there's things like and pricing is part of that. I'm not going to deep dive into how to do a CMA, because you've got that class coming. Listing paperwork and actually inputting listings into the MLS is another piece, right? I think most of you, as I look around, with Christy might be the exception, because everybody's done listings and input listings in the MLS, so that's not a new thing for anybody here. Okay. And Christy, I don't know, Kim, are you still doing it? Do you guys do any, like, the listing workshop where people actually get to practice putting that in? Do you do those things?
We have one coming up with Gloria at the end of the month.
Okay, because that's a great class. I used to do that when I was running the coaching program, and making sure that we spent, some of us, Colleen can attest to this, spent several hours on Saturdays here, practicing putting in listings, because you do have to know how to do that. So those were like the main pieces of this listing topic. Is there something that you guys think of that I didn't mention in, like, the main categories before we get into the more details? No?
No, but I want to piggyback on the first topic that you touched on about their why.
Mhm.
There's always motivation behind it, regardless of the
Mhm.
situation, I feel like. And even sometimes the client may not know what that motivation is, but
Mhm.
being able to really hear what they're
Mhm.
saying, not just listening to their words, like
Sure.
really try to understand it
Mhm.
and extrapolate something that maybe they're not
They
thinking
haven't
of.
even thought
Right,
of,
so
sure.
really what their motivation is,
Sure.
because I had experienced a situation where my dad had passed away. And I was that person that didn't want to sell the house,
Mhm.
because it's so silly, right? Like, there's memories in the house, so I didn't want to sell it, but I didn't want to keep it, so. Even though it sat for a year and a half, I was that person,
Yeah.
so I was able to have myself in the shoes of that
person and understanding that there was motivation behind what I was doing.
Mhm.
Past the emotions, so I think
You
there's
wanted more than a robot. You
Yeah.
wanted not a seller, you wanted somebody that was gonna identify with their feelings and actually give a crap. about
Yes,
it,
and I
instead
had
of
a
just a
robot.
number.
and
Mhm.
all the wrong things that went into that, so I tried to take that experience and turn it around to never be that
And
person.
not do that, right?
For you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's important, and one of the things that I have in my notes and just, something that I do as a practice, there's certain questions that you can ask your sellers to try to understand their situation better too, and obviously in that type of situation, questions are gonna be different, depending on who you're talking to and what they're telling you. And I think it's important to do that exploration, and be able to ask questions when you're hearing something, follow up with questions to try to really understand their why and get to their motivation, even if it isn't something they understand or can articulate,
Right.
right off the top of their head. Because you could say, why are you selling? And they're gonna give you a short answer, but there's usually a lot more to that, right? Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about the listing. I brought an example of what we use for our team, and it's actually Jordan's because I promptly left my house without mine. And she had some in her office, but I'll pass this around. And one of the things that I wanted to chat with you guys about is, what are you guys using? Do you use anything for listing collateral when you go and you're gonna have a consultation with a client? What types of things are you taking for them? Do you have something, does everybody have something they use currently? Good, Christy, I'm guessing not yet, right? So what are some of the things that are in that material? What is important in that collateral that you're taking?
We're talking about-
Any of you, whoever. please.
Well, I have a packet
Mhm.
and then I have a little gift bag that has cookies and
Cucumbers.
cookies, a magnet and a jar gripper,
Mhm.
just a little here.
With your branding on it.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
and then I'm so used to doing like stuff on the smart board in my classroom, so I realized I need something on my computer, a presentation that we can go through together to keep me on track.
Mhm.
So I took that packet and kind of put it on Canva, so we go through it together, it's less detailed, so we just talk.
Mhm.
So they're not reading the whole thing, but it has all the points on it,
Sure.
and I really like that. And I would also love to know if people do like 2 appointments, because I'm meeting people at a cabin today.
Mhm.
I don't expect to sit down with them at this cabin and go through everything. So
Right.
I'm gonna say, let's set up
Mhm.
a time when we can sit down and go through all the paperwork together. Is that what most?
So that's
do?
a great question. And I remember, not when I first got into this business, I think when I first came over to KW though, so that was about 7 years ago, I think. Allison Adam Anderson, do you guys know who she is? She's now does some commercial stuff. She's around quite a bit, but she and I used to joke that we were like the only 2 people we knew that had that 2-step approach to our listing plan, right? Because most of the time you'll hear, because we're in a sales business, it's like you close the deal when you go to your appointment, right? Ultimately, that's the goal, but I'm definitely not a hardcore salesperson, so the way I have done the business, and it doesn't mean it's the only way to do it, but I usually do a 2-step approach. I rarely go through listing paperwork on the first appointment. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, and I'm sure there's a school of thought that says, get them to sign, I typically will go with some idea of their market price. If it's a house I do not know, I will go with a loose CMA that I have prepared, so I have a basic idea of what I think for pricing. And then I tell them right up front that since I haven't walked through the house, this is, I have my thoughts initially, but as soon as I have all of the information from this appointment, I then send them a complete analysis. So I find most of the time that works well. You gotta have some idea of what the price is gonna be, because obviously they're gonna be interested in that information. And the other thing that you can gain in that conversation is getting an idea of what they're hoping the price is, right? And then you can also gauge whether or not they're way off base or not, so, yeah.
So I just have an interesting when I go to like a listing appointment with, I have the ERS with me, right, and you wanted to sign it, you know what I mean? But I never push it because I don't have dates set down, you know what I mean, like I always get so nervous about. It wants the date you're gonna list, it wants the date it's going in the MLS, it wants,
Yeah.
you know, those dates, and I don't know that, you know, and sometimes the sellers don't know that, so is there a way that agents go and they have them fill it out without having
Yeah.
those, okay, so I
Yeah,
don't know.
so
that.
you can, and this, and I would say. Even if you're more of a two-step person, always have the paperwork ready, just in case, right? Because even in my years of doing this. I generally default to the two-step process, but there have been occasions where it just made sense to get the paperwork signed. Now, there's a lot of times that people don't know exactly the dates they wanna list, and we don't have a firm price yet. And so I usually go through all that paperwork and go through the ERS with them, have them sign it. And let them know that all of that can be filled in and initialed at the time we determine what the actual price is and when we know exactly what date they're listing. And I mentioned too, that even when it comes to pricing, especially in a market like this, when it's so volatile. We don't even have to make that decision until the day before this thing goes live in the MLS, like we can look up until the day before, or even the morning of. And make sure that there isn't a comp that either just listed that we need to consider in our pricing, or that just closed that weren't able to get the actual sale price on.
So you'll have them sign it so that they're committing to you, committing to the compensation, committing to the marketing, the sign, all that other stuff, and then at the time right before listing, you'll have them
Yes.
sign it again.
Have them initial and, initial just those parts of it, so that's definitely a strategy, and there's a lot of people that do that for even listings that they don't think are gonna be 6 months from now. Which is crazy, like I joke about that, I'm actually working on one right now, and my dilemma is, I know the ERS is changing, or the ERTS is changing like in a week, so why do I even bother having them sign it, but, cause they're probably not listing till next spring, but it's a $1 million property with a beautiful yard. And we're gonna get photographs because they just had the mulching done, it's all looks beautiful, and if they list in March, which is kind of what we're thinking. It's not gonna look beautiful, so we're doing the aerial pictures and the drone stuff and all the outdoor photographs, so I need to have listing paperwork signed. Because I don't wanna make that investment without having listing paperwork in hand, even if it doesn't have actual specific dates on it or whatever, so.
I just write TBD.
Yeah, and you can fill that in, you can fill it in TBD, and then you can,
And then I,
rather than leave it
Mark it
blank, and then you can mark it up, or you can. Just redo a new ERTS with all the specifics again and have them sign it, once so yeah, there's different ways to go about that, and I've really never found anyone that's pushed back on that. Any of you guys who've done that and left those things to be determined don't get pushed back on that. No, I've never had anybody push back in the time I've done it, so you definitely can do that. What else? Who else has something that they're using? So that seller's blueprint that we use at Bespoke is also on a digital format. I rarely do listing appointments by Zoom or digitally, but it is, if you have a very high-tech client who would rather sit and go through it on your laptop or your iPad versus a book form, that's an option, right? So we have both options. With our buyers, we do a lot more, especially since COVID, we do a lot more appointments on Zoom. But listing appointments are much harder because you need to see the property at some point, so. What other stuff do you guys use, or what is included in your listing? I love all the extra special things that you do, which doesn't surprise me, you teacher. Her little packet of things. Does anybody take anything like that for a listing appointment with them?
I have a booklet also,
Mhm.
that I do, and I have it digital and available in print.
Mhm.
And it's pretty much like 46 pages, who's gonna read that, but,
Right.
you know, it's tangible material, it has,
Share it with them.
you know,
That's true.
yeah.
Did you do it through, what platforms have you guys used? Has anybody created it through Command, which is available to all of
No,
us?
I
at
created
KW?
it independently, Canva.
Canva, yeah, Canva's a big is the popular one.
Yeah.
There is, for those of you who are new, that, and online, if you're new, I think Linda, is that Linda? I haven't met you, but doing, going in Command, there are designs and things like that for listing material and things like that, that can help you create collateral to take to your clients. I think it's important to make sure that you talk about yourself a little, which I'm horrible about. So one of the pages in there is about my experience a little bit, right? So make sure they know a little bit about your experience. Make sure that you let them know about Keller Williams. When I first moved over to KW from Remax 7 years ago, KW was still pretty new in our market, and it was surprising to me how many times I had to really sell Keller Williams to clients because they weren't familiar with it. Now we're much more of a household name, you know, we're one of the bigs, certainly in this area and obviously nationally and even internationally. Which is so cool. So I think that, but making sure that people understand the value of working with a brokerage like that is important too. So if you don't have something like that included, I would make sure that you add that. Obviously, when you're doing anything that's you're printing out, the market stuff changes so often. So that part of it gets really hard to put in print because it's like, well, the market could look different and next month I have to reprint all my collateral, whatever, right? So keep it that stuff pretty broad. Information on, what it takes for presenting a property for listing, right? That's another great piece that's, I think in ours, it's like, what does it take to list your house as far as the curb appeal and what are the things that you want to think about doing before listing, staging, that kind of stuff. How many people use professional photography? Everybody using a professional photographer? Okay. I would 100% say to have that be part of your practice. And I know there's some newbies listening too. It's an additional cost, but it's not a huge cost. And it really does make a big difference in how the listing appears online. And let's be honest, in today's digital age, you got to get people off the couch and into the house, right? That's the goal. And my pet peeve is when you see listings where you can see the agent and like the reflection on the mirror, or the toilet seat is up, or there's the family pet in the picture. It's like, I have a whole list of things that drive me crazy about, when agents do their own pictures. And even sometimes with professional photographers, like the toilet seat is a big one, I'm like, why would you leave the toilet seat up? And I've actually had a photographer go and retake a picture because I was like, or edit it, because I'm like, how did you not notice this? Like, usually I go to the house and I'm getting it all ready for pictures, but there was a situation where I didn't do that and the toilet seat was up and he didn't notice it and put it down. And I was like, come on, how long have we been doing this together? It's so frustrated. So what are some other things that might be important to put in collateral? Anybody think of anything?
Testimonials.
Reviews, testimonials from other clients, that's a great thing, right? And
A little dictionary of the most used words.
glossary of terms is super important because here's the thing, there are so many things and so many abbreviations to everything, especially at KW. but there are so many abbreviations and things that we use with clients, and they get so confused. And I find that having that in your material that you're leaving with them, they're still gonna ask you, but they also have the option to look in that booklet and see, what is the EMB again? Or what is, that's one that, with buyers, it's the first timers, they're constantly asking you questions. So I would say have that in your buyer information as well. What else? Other good, this is all good.
A QR code to your website.
Oh, see, now we're getting fancy.
I'm just trying to think what's in.
Yeah, yeah, so if you have, if you have a website, you should have a Keller Williams website for sure, right? You can do the QR code. So that they can see your website, which also will show them your listings, and when you're talking with the seller, it's gonna show them their listing, right? So they're gonna be able to see it when they hit the QR code once you got it listed, which is awesome. Yeah, those are all great ideas. So yeah, so the listing collateral is a big piece of what you go through at a consult, right? So when you get a call from a seller who wants to set up an appointment, or wants you to, says they want, they want to talk about listing their house, right? What I do is have a conversation on the phone, if I have time at that moment, because sometimes you pick up the phone and you're on your way to an appointment or you're in the middle of something or whatever. But the general information that I try to get initially is, their address, their contact info, all of their contact info. And then if I have time to have conversation while we're in the process of also setting an appointment, I do ask on the phone about improvements they've made in the last 5 years is important, but anything, they feel like they want to tell you. Sometimes you'll go and people will have literally the whole list of everything they've done, which is great. I mean, it's really a great resource. And you don't have to dig up dates for different things and all that, but rarely are people that organized. But all of that is important to know. And if you can get that information when you're on the phone with them, setting an appointment, it does help you with your pricing. You still want to get eyes on the property before you finalize pricing for sure, but definitely understanding if I've got a house that was built in 69, was the kitchen updated in the last 5 years? That's going to make a difference, compared to comparables that maybe have original kitchens or, whatever. So gaining that kind of information is important. Trying to think. So, and then usually just, here's another thing. And I asked this question and I'll ask some of you guys who have done, how many people that have had listings have been on competitive listing appointments where they know they're competing with another agent?
Oh, no, at the end,
Mhm.
I thought we were just chatting.
Mhm.
Cause she was a friend, and then she's like, well, I called 4 other agents.
So, on that note, my question is, and maybe now that you've done this, you might have a different way you handle that. I ask this question all the time. Do you want to be first in or do you want to be last in? And Kim says first. Okay, and I don't think there's a right answer. People have different opinions on that. But, Kim says there's a right answer. Sorry. Kim says you want to be first. Kim, tell us why you want to be first.
Because the data shows that the first or second agent in the doors is significantly more likely to get it than the last.
Okay, so there is some data that would support that the first impression, provided it's a good one, you're more likely to get the deal done. Some people would say they want to be first and last, meaning if they know they're first, they want to offer the opportunity to come back after they've met with the other agents to then close the deal at the end, at the end of it, which is a great tactic, right? Lisa, I'm so glad you heard you say that, because I will say I've been doing this a long time and have fallen victim to, especially when it's somebody that you know well, thinking we're just having a chat about selling their house and of course we're gonna work together. And then finding out that they are actually talking to other agents. So making sure that you ask the question, and that's actually an okay question to ask when you're setting the appointment. And don't be afraid to ask. And actually, I have found that when I say, I think that's great, I'm so glad to hear that you're talking to other people and making sure that because if you're confident in what you deliver and the value that you bring, that's gonna resonate, right? And the other side of it is, and this is where in our business, we talk a lot about abundance versus scarcity. I'm sure you've all heard that in some KW classes especially, right? I can have the attitude that there is enough out there to share, right? Or I can have the attitude that I gotta grip every single opportunity so hard that I won't lose it. And the longer you're doing this, the more you realize that you don't actually wanna work with people that don't wanna work with you. So let those people go, right? So if for some reason your personality and theirs didn't mesh as well as, another agent, don't let it eat you up, right? And don't, yes, there's things you can learn, and I will say from not asking that question in past situations, I definitely learned and changed my way of communicating when I initially am talking with a potential client. And it's, that's a great question, and not being scared about it, but it is interesting when you're talking with a friend and you find out that they're interviewing other agents, you're like, oh my gosh, I totally didn't see that coming, and then you feel. Or I felt stupid, right? I was like, my gosh, how did I miss that, right? So. Either ask that question when you're making the appointment, because then you kind of have an idea. You can also then just see when they're meeting with the other clients or the other agents, if that is an option to sort of coordinate around that. So then you do have the opportunity to get in quickly if you want to be first, right? I'm going on a listing appointment on Friday, and it's somebody that was referred to me from a friend. And I don't know this woman. I may have met her because these friends have neighborhood parties, pool parties and stuff that we've gone to, because we don't live in the neighborhood, but we live nearby. And I may have met her, but I'm not 100% sure. But her husband, she tells me when I ask this question, her husband has a friend who is a realtor. And her perspective is, I don't want to work with somebody that we know that well. Like, I would like to interview and work with somebody that is referred to us that we don't really know. So, but I have every thought that ultimately they could choose the husband's friend, right? Because I like my friends and I would treat my friends really great. And if I'm gonna go on I could see that they might decide to work with their friend, which is fine, right? So.
Well, I feel like sometimes people say that
Mhm.
as a scapegoat, right? So just in case they didn't like you,
Oh,
they always
yeah,
have the friend, right?
Yeah.
If they like you, then they can be like,
Yeah.
oh, you know what, you just fit the personality.
great, right.
Right.
Yes. Oh, for sure. There's people I think that could use that as,
I would
oh,
be that person.
oh, my husband's, cousin is a realtor, so I think we're gonna use them, Usually they don't tell you that up front though.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
at any rate, so yeah, but that being said, the benefit of that is knowing that I'm gonna be competing for this listing, right? So how I show up is important, and it isn't, and because they were referred to me and I don't have any relationship with them. If I hadn't heard that, or if I hadn't asked that question, I would assume that they're probably interviewing other people. But to get that specific information, and even if you can find out who they're interviewing, right? That's also a great thing. So setting that appointment, going, when I get to a house, when I'm going to a list, for a listing, I obviously have my collateral with me. I do take listing paperwork, though, as we talked about, I don't always pull it out right away, or even at the end of that appointment. We do a walkthrough of the house. That's one of the first things that we usually do. And I don't know about you guys who've done this, but one of my best practices, partly because of my old age, is that I've learned to ask or to ask permission to put notes in my phone when we're walking around, because that way it's right there. I'm not trying to write on a notebook because I lose my notebooks, or my notebooks get put on a shelf and I'm like, wait, where was that information? And if it's in my phone with the title is whatever the title of the note is whatever the property address is, and it's always easy to go back and find it. Especially in a situation where maybe it's 6 months from now that they're gonna want to list, and you're like, I don't remember anything, like, to be able to search your notes and go back and find exactly the details of the house from the day you went, what your thoughts were, you know, at that time is important. So we tour the house. One of the questions, when it gets to questions, I like to ask, one question I always ask when either when we're touring the house or when we're sitting down after we walked through, I always ask the sellers what their favorite features of their house are. Because from a marketing perspective, you wanna know that because you wanna make sure that you're highlighting those things in your comments. Because they're important to that seller, right? And it also, I mean, sometimes you'll find out something that you may have missed, like central vac, or, you know, usually you won't miss something like that, but there's times that, oh yeah, I forgot they had central vacuum, you know, whatever. But you'll find different things to different people, especially if you're new. There may be some feature to their house that you're like, crap, what is that thing called? And they'll tell you, because they'll be like, oh, I love our, you know, tray ceiling, or I love our, you know, whatever it is, our wainscoting and the blah, 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 and you're like, oh yeah, that's what that's called, you know, that kind of thing. So just a little trick, but also a way to make sure that when you are putting together marketing material and doing your comments in the MLS, that you're highlighting things that are important to them, because that's gonna make a difference to them ultimately. So we usually do the walkthrough, talk about, this is when I definitely want to make sure that people tell me what they've done in the last 5 years. If they want to tell me what they've done in the last 25, that's fine, but the last 5 really is important. And then, you know, once we're done with that, I usually take notes also during that time of things that I would want to let them know or remind them of prior to having the house photographed. Because you can write notes about the rooms, you know, the dimensions, this, you know, space, the, you know, decor or finishes or whatever of each space, and certainly anything they've updated. But sometimes you'll be in a house where you're like, oh, I want to remember to tell them to do this or get rid of this, or, you know, clean the closets out, or, you know, whatever it is, right? Before we would take pictures. And one of the things that I try with most houses, log cabins, I don't know, and some more rural properties, maybe not, more farmettes type houses, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but with most, you know, suburban houses, let's say that, one of my rules of thumb is if it's on the floor and it's not a piece of furniture, I need a really good reason why we're keeping it there and not getting rid of it or packing it up or putting it away for pictures, because the less clutter you can have obviously helps with the photographs. And there's lots of people that have, you know, the pile of magazines or the dog bed or the, you know, just random stuff that they have in various places, and really any of that stuff can be out of there. So those are the kind of notes that I'll put in my phone when I'm doing that walkthrough, so that I remember to mention those kind of things. So then when we sit down at the table, this is where we start talking about pricing. So much fun. So even if we don't talk about the contract, we're still going to talk about pricing, and we're still going to talk about commission, right? So even if we're not looking over the paperwork when we're doing that, those two things are still topics that you really want to make sure you're having a conversation with your sellers about. So one of the questions I ask is regarding the current market. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, how familiar are you with teaser pricing, right? Because we're seeing a lot of what you could call teaser pricing in our marketplace right now, and want to understand what their familiarity is with it, what they've heard, what they know, you know, who told them what about what they should get for their house, all those kind of things, right? And making sure they understand. So from a statistic standpoint, right now, when you look at listings, vast majority of listings of sellers are backing their pricing off about 10% from market value. And that's a number I usually tell them, because that's been pretty consistent, certainly recently. And that creates that, you know, teaser pricing, and it gives that opportunity for more buyers to see the property, because they're gonna, you know, if it's listed 10% lower than the market value, there may be people that would see it that wouldn't see it if it was listed at market price. The other thing that we talk about a lot, I talk about a lot, and this gets into now how I'm doing my CMAs, but looking at all the comparables and really talking with your sellers about not only what the comparables are selling for, but what they're listing for is a huge, huge piece that you need to make sure that they start to understand. Because what they hear is what things are selling for. They're not really relating to what they were listed for that maybe helped generate that price. And certainly in this market, that's one of the things that we want to make sure we're giving them a chance to understand and ask questions about and wrestle with. So, and then the right price. So you mentioned this without, you know, without getting into all of the details of a CMA, right? Pricing, the general rule of thumb that I use is, looking at the style of the house, the school district, the size of the house, and the age of the house. So, SSSA. So A is age, style, size, and school district, not in any particular order. Now, this gets a lot harder when you're looking at a property where it's hard to find comps for, right? So school district, for example, is really important in some of our closer suburban areas. In some of the outer line areas, depends, maybe not as much. Township is also important here, because in some of the towns, you can look at, we'll use Webster, for example, because that's where I live, and I live in the town of Penfield with Webster schools, right? So making sure that you're comparing apples to apples, for the most part, is important with comping houses. As far as size, I try to keep it personally within 500 square feet of the size. So if it's 1,200 square feet, I might be down to 1,000, and I might go up to, you know, 1,500, like in that range somewhere. That kind of thing. Style is also important, again, unless you're really having trouble finding comps. Most appraisers are looking at style as well, but they're even also looking at various styles when they're having trouble finding comps. So the big ones there, the big things there to consider is if, for example, if you have a Cape Cod that has single floor living, you can certainly compare it to ranch houses, right? It's not quite the same value as a ranch, but if you don't have any other comps that are, or let's say a ranch, you can use a Cape Cod to compare it. If you don't have any other ranches, you can use a Cape Cod and just consider that the ranch is still it's gonna have a bigger footprint, probably a bigger basement, so there is gonna be some higher value to that. However, if the Cape Cod has single floor living, you can kind of use those if you need to when you're struggling, like I know when we talked about yours. But typically you're, you know, especially in suburbia, you're not gonna compare a 2-story colonial to a ranch house, right? You want them to be consistent. And then age, I try to keep this within 10 years. Now, the other thing is about age is with all the updating that everybody's doing, thanks HGTV. There is something, what do they call it in realist? They call it what's the word? It's like an estimated age. It's not, so let's say the house was built in 1940, but they've had so many improvements. You'll notice occasionally in the tax records that they've given it a different age. So they may have bumped it up to like a 1980s house or a 2000s house, based on whatever those people have done to that house and has been permitted, so the town knows. it's effective age is what, I'm like, what's the word, effective age. So you may see that occasionally, and that's important to know, because if you're really comping a 1940s or 1920s farmhouse, for example, in the country, and you have a comp that says it's got an effective age of 2000, you need to know that, yeah.
So I have a listing right now, it's coming up in a couple weeks, and it's listed in the tax, it was just appraised last year. And it's listed as 1900. The original house probably maybe like 700. I'm calling the people that did all the additions today to get all the information, but that was 1900. Everything else, which is a 2000 square foot house, was added on after 1997.
Okay.
So like, I feel like in the listing, I need to put 1900 because the assessment, the tax records, everything says 1900 in the comments.
Yes.
I can put that
Yes.
there's been all new additions.
And there isn't anything in it that says effective age, it doesn't have anything like that, and like when you look in real estate, you don't see that anywhere, okay, cause sometimes that's a perfect example of when you may see that, and I don't, it's, you know, it's hit or miss, because municipalities are different with how they're doing their taxing and all of that, so it's hard to know really when they do that. I don't think it's consistent, certainly from town to town, it's not consistent, but you will see it occasionally, so if you do, just make sure either if you know the house has a different effective age than the 1900 that it was built in, take that into consideration too when you're looking at your comparables also, because it isn't a 1900s house necessarily, it's more of a 2000 or 1997, 1990s house. So yeah, so those are the things that we talk about, and that's what I tell clients when I'm talking with them. If I'm not going through a full CMA with them, I do kind of give them these guidelines, because sometimes people will say, oh, well, there's especially, well, there's a house around the corner, it may not have even come up in my CMA because it's a ranch and I'm in a contemporary colonial, and I'm not even, now, I always make sure on that note, always, especially if you go into a neighborhood, but anytime you go somewhere for a listing appointment, make sure you've looked at the close proximity or the neighborhood, because even if it's not a comp, they're gonna know about the house around the corner that sold for X, Y, or Z, or that's on the market and wanna know if you know what it sold for. So don't miss the opportunity for looking at what else is in that neighborhood, even if it doesn't show up as a comp for your property. Yeah, Lisa.
Do you add on a certain percentage for acreage?
So with acreage, what I typically do is I look at, if you can find any, I look at what acreage in that area goes for, just raw acreage, and use some percentage of that in my equation. So if I'm in an area and I know that, acres are selling roughly $5,000 or $6,000 an acre, right? I'm gonna add not 5,000 or 6,000 necessarily for every acre that's included, but I'm gonna add probably 3 maybe, so like 2/3 roughly, maybe a half. Of that value to just increase, to account for acreage, yeah.
Do you feel like in like the smaller towns that I work in, do you feel like it could be expanded to over 10 years? Like all of the houses in Waterloo are like literally 1800, 1900 if you're lucky. If you see like a 2000 house, you're like, oh my God, it's so
Yeah.
new. It's just not like it is out here, it's vastly different, so.
Yeah.
I don't usually do within 10 years
With
because
10.
they're all 1800,
Yeah.
just 1850 and 1820, is it
Yeah,
really
it
that?
doesn't really matter.
Cause it's all stone foundation, I go
Yeah.
by like, right,
Yes.
like
So
either
if
block or
you're-
stone.
Yeah, so if you're working in a place like that where everything is the stone, foundation, it's the pre-century, right, house.
Prehistoric.
You can get prehistoric. You can definitely, anything that's 1800s, really anything that's in the early 1900s, around the turn of the century, any of that, and it doesn't have to be within 10 years, for sure.
I just wanna make sure I was like.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Yeah, and it gets hard, especially now with having so few comps. A lot of these things have to be expanded a little bit more, and then you just have to get smarter with how you're comparing them, right? And Rob can get into some of those details with the CMAs, but so those are all some of the things, but this kind of information is important, in really explaining to sellers how you're evaluating, and not only how you're evaluating it, but also how an appraiser is going to. Because if their buyer is getting financing, they're gonna have an appraisal, and it's gonna matter where we price this house, right? It's gonna matter what the sale price is too, so. The other question I ask is, when it comes to pricing, is I ask them what their familiarity is or what they know about escalation clauses. Because that is another, obviously, tool that we're using constantly now, and there's a lot of sellers that don't have a clue, right? And along with that, you can ask them about delayed negotiations. That doesn't necessarily have to do with pricing, but you can ask them about that. Now, escalation clauses are going to get real interesting with this new law coming into play here. Because now we're looking at the possibilities of commission being a concession or something agreed to that the seller pays that affects their net, right? So it'll be interesting to see what Jen says about seller's net sheets in her in her class that's coming up after this, right? Because that's the thing, like if you're, and when you have a listing and you get, let's say you get 5 offers for your seller, you really have to figure out with those escalation clauses and with how the pricing's done and how the commission is structured, what is the net for the seller and really what is the best offer? And that's all gonna get, much more, shouldn't say more complicated, it's escalation clauses are always a little bit complicated and putting them against each other, and how do you do that? How do you guys feel about that? Are you guys comfortable with how you do that? I'm sure somebody who doesn't know anything
I'm
about
sure it
this.
could improve, honestly, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
a better way than just an Excel spreadsheet that I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
offer A, B, C, D,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a better way, so.
Yeah, I have an Excel spreadsheet that has each of the offers, and it talks about the purchase price or the purchase price, the escalation factor, the top dollar for that particular offer, but then I have a line that is the top dollar based on competition. Right, because if offer A is 300, escalates up to 350 by $3,000, right? 350 would be their top dollar, but not necessarily their top based on competition. Maybe it only had to be 333 based on competition. So I kind of show all of that so that when I'm looking at the spreadsheet, I can see how, like who went to 350. So am I already at 350 or more, right?
If you have one saved, I would love to see that.
Sure, I'll send it to you.
So great.
Mhm.
I think if you
I think I'm a
send it to
visual
me,
person.
I can send it out to the people.
Okay,
I think I'm a visual as well, because after hearing them, like.
Yeah, so it's definitely it's just making sure that you're clear, understanding how escalations are done and how you put them against each other so that you can communicate it to your seller. And then the other piece that's gonna have to get added to this is how is commission paid, right? Because if my seller is paying commissions, that affects their
Right.
bottom line too, or if the buyer is paying commission or, there's just all of this that it's gonna get interesting.
It's
So,
so nerve-wracking and like anxiety, like I have so much anxiety about it because I have this listing coming up and she's going to Spain on the 10th.
Mhm.
So all my paperwork is signed, she has another POA to sign stuff.
Yeah.
But I have her right now, like, this is, we charge 6%, she's, comfortable paying the buyer, like,
Yeah.
everything's good, like, just like how it's been.
But you've already had that conversation with
So
her.
it doesn't change.
So it doesn't-
I don't put this new paperwork, like,
Because
I have her
here's
sign
the
everything.
thing. Well,
I
the
split that.
ERCS will change, they are did the board put it out there yet? I thought it was maybe this week, it's not out there yet.
We are getting, it's not out yet,
Okay.
and Keller Williams, our revised forms will be available on the 9th.
Okay, so here's the thing, if you were transparent with that seller about commission, when you signed that listing paperwork, really for her, nothing's changed, right? Because commission has always been negotiable. Our fee isn't changing, right? Our fee is still our fee, right? Whether or not they want to compensate a buyer's agent for the buyer side is really the burning question. Let's talk about that. That's the next thing on here is commission conversation. How do you guys feel? Or does anybody have a way, or have you thought about how you explain the value of a buyer's agent to a seller? If, for example, somebody is, because here's the thing, if I'm working with a buyer, I'm really hoping that the listing agent's having a conversation with their seller about why my role is important, right? What are things you think are important to communicate to a seller about why they might want to pay the buyer's agent's commission? Anybody have any good ideas?
They can offer more, sorry, they can offer more,
If
if they're offering commission.
and they're not having to pay
to come to
commission.
Pocket, they can offer you more, so it's gonna equal out whether they pay their agent or whether they allow you to rope it into the loan, it's gonna be kind of similar.
I just think that the buyer's agent provides value by vetting the client, doing the pre-qualification and making sure that they have the funds, you know, available to close and kind of I'm hoping that they're educating their buyer on kind of that process so that it works seamlessly on the listing agent's end as well.
And that's that is one of the biggest things I think that's important. I can tell you, we just sold a property that I, as the listing agent, got an email from a buyer directly. Basically with the details of her offer in an email, not on offer paperwork. Telling me she didn't want to work with an agent, that this is what she was willing to pay, that, and it, you know, broke it down, cash, blah, blah, blah. She even sent a proof of funds along with it, right? And we got 9 offers total on this property, and it wasn't our personal home, but it was a property that we owned. And her offer was honestly one of the best offers. But I was super hesitant because I'm like, I don't know this person from Adam, right? And nobody has vetted her, nobody's had a conversation with her, it's just this email, and you try to get in touch with her and she's doesn't want to talk to an agent, right? Or doesn't want to work with an agent. So I was trying to have her connect with one of the agents on my team to be able to have an offer written for her, because ultimately, if she's the prevailing bid, we're gonna have to put this on an offer paperwork, and it's gonna have to go to attorneys, whether the attorney does it or somebody does it, it's gonna have to get into a formal offer, right? So she would have probably been, she was of the top 2, but we didn't even take her seriously. And the next morning, wouldn't you know, I woke up to an email saying she was releasing her offer, or basically recanting her offer. And I'm like, that's the kind of situation that our sellers could be in if they're dealing with these clients that don't want to have representation. You know, nobody is vetting them. Nobody is making sure that they actually are serious about it. And what if we had said, sure, we'll work with that. And maybe she didn't the next day, but what if it was 2 days later? She decided, never mind, right? At that point, we've already told all the other people, oh, by the way, we've taken this offer. You know, now in this market, I'm sure one of the other 9 would probably still be in the game, but you just don't, you know, so those are the kind of situations that happen with nobody looking out for that, and not looking out for nobody invested in that buyer and really understanding if they can even buy this house, if they're really serious, any of those things, right? So that's a great example.
Yeah, but in the same breath, you could be working with a buyer's agent who lets their clients go rogue and call you.
Yeah.
And try to negotiate the offer.
I know, and that's the hard part. I think the hardest part about this conversation with the seller, and really making sure that your seller understands the value, is we all know there are agents out there that don't do what they should do, right? And don't do a good job. And so at the end of the day, having a buyer's agent doesn't guarantee that somebody is actually doing all of these things. But let's put on our, we're gonna be positive about this and think that we're all professionals, and we are hopefully looking out, for the best interests of our clients and the contract. Like, at the end of the day, the goal for that buyer is to get the house to closing, and for the seller to get to closing, right? How about your value? Because the other conversation that's gonna come up with this commission conversation is, will you reduce your commission? You're shaking your head, nope.
No, because you have to provide a value and set a standard for yourself, and if you won't keep the same standard for yourself, how are you gonna do for your client? right? Like if I back down on my own money, what am I gonna do with yours?
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's one of the best objections, I think, for handling the commission reduction conversation is, if I am willing to easily give up my money, how good of a job do you think I'm gonna be doing to protect yours, right? That's a great argument. I think the other thing that I have said in this market is, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, here's the thing. I have many clients that have been very, very happy with where they've ended up as far as what they've gotten for their house. And at the end of the day, isn't the goal for you to be happy with what you got for your house, not how much you have to pay me? Like, ultimately, if you're super happy, if we sold your house and you got $350,000 for your house and you were like, oh my gosh, I thought it was gonna get 2 or 250 or whatever, like, you want, at the end of the day, why does my commission really matter? First of all, obviously we don't work for free, and everybody uses that as a line, but that's true. I mean, and depending on the client, you can say that. You have to be a little careful, because people do get a little defensive about that one, but I think it's important to make sure that they understand that you're providing a service. And here's the other thing, there are people out there that will discount their commission, and they'll also discount their service. And if you want to work with me and value what I bring and the service that I provide, it comes at this price, right? Versus the next guy that may do it for less, but it's, you're gonna get a different level of service, and maybe that's okay for you. And if it is, great, go to the discount broker, but that's not the way that I operate, and it's not the way my brokerage operates. So, what else? I think clearly communicating commission, clearly communicating that, we have a standard that our commission is set by our broker. That's also another thing that can be used, right? When you're talking with the seller, so that they don't have the expectation that you actually have all the control to reduce your commission. That's kind of one of those things. My mom said I can't, whatever, like when we were kids, my mom used to say, blame me, and I'm like, all right. So it's kind of one of those things, like, well, my mom won't let me reduce commission, so this is what it is, but that's another way to take advantage of the fact that we do have a broker that does have an expectation. Now, I know that Susan and I haven't been to any of the classes recently about what she is saying. I'm sure there is some room for discussion. The other thing that I have said to clients is I don't reduce my commission out of the gate, but there has been situations where I've needed to bring parties together for whatever reason, or to offer up some compensation to help bring parties together and to make sure we get this deal done for you. So I would rather charge my full commission now, and then if that happens and the need for that happens, that I have that opportunity. Because if I reduce my commission now and then there's a conversation and we're still missing something, which in this market isn't happening as much, but it used to happen. It used to happen where we were close, but we couldn't quite get there, right, between the buyer and seller. And if I'd already reduced my commission, I didn't have any more to give away to help bring that deal together, Or if there was a situation where, something happened at the house and they needed help paying for something. Like, I've done that kind of thing, but I can't do that if I'm reducing my commission. So I usually try to use that as another selling point for just keeping full commission at this, at the beginning of the game. Lise, what was your question? You said you had a question specific.
Yeah, I have several. So the cabin I'm going to look at today is on 6.5 acres down in Middlesex. It is currently being used as an Airbnb, so it's a year-round cabin. Has been completely redone inside, so I would list it as residential. But do you ever do a duplicate listing and list it like lots, land, hunting, camp, whatever that category
For the
is?
cabin. I never have, but I think you could do that. Yeah, you just have to, if you ever do a duplicate listing, you have to make sure that you note it very clearly in the comments. That it's the same property as, and provide the MLS number for the duplicate listing. You know, that is probably not a bad idea with a property like that, because right now the current owner is using it in a certain way. But somebody else looking at it may be interested in it as a hunting cabin or a, you know, that kind of thing, and may not even see it if
Right,
it wasn't listed in that,
yeah.
in that
that's my thought.
capacity, yeah.
And it'll be easy to market it as an investment property or year-round home or, right, no, hunting camp or a retreat or something like that. I do know that sometimes mice get in.
Hmm.
And so, I'm wondering what would be the conversation you would have with your seller about preventing that from happening? Or disclosing that on
Right.
PCB.
Well, yeah, it's tough. I mean, any house that's in
Country living.
the woods or in the country, I mean, they all have it, and you never see that on a PCD, even though you know that it has to happen, right? I would say, I would probably see, does it have a basement?
No.
Okay, because there's not a way to put something in the, you know, down in the basement to make sure that we're trapping them or whatever. Yeah, that's a tough one,
But
because
you know what, like,
you don't wanna have
I don't know if they know where they.
where they put
I
it.
know they've rechecked some of the logs, but not all of them.
Mhm,
So that process, I think, is a pretty big process.
yeah. Yeah, it's probably, I mean, that's a tough one. I would say probably less of a concern of how do we prevent them, and more, are they living in or nearby this property?
No,
Okay, because that's the hard part, because you want to make sure that before somebody's going to see it, that there's nothing there.
right,
Lisa, have you looked up the reviews on Airbnb?
Has anybody ever said anything?
yes.
Has anyone ever said like,
Well,
it
they
was great except Stuart Little came?
they actually disclose it in the Airbnb listing.
Okay,
Because they say this is a country
Yeah,
Right.
cabin,
yeah.
this is,
Right.
if you
Yeah.
don't like to see.
Stuart
Little, they used some endearing word.
I would
Right.
use that endearing word.
in the
I would just
PCD,
go, I
yeah.
would put it out there.
Put it in the PCD and mention, especially if it's out there in the Airbnb listing, if they
Yes.
mention it, then I would,
Find
I would
That is a
definitely
disclosable
put
thing that you
something-
have to do
yeah.
with bed bugs as well, you have to disclose that
Yeah.
if you know about it.
Yeah, so I would definitely, especially if they've already put it out there on their Airbnb listing, I would say something about it, but also note that it's, you know, because it's a country cabin, you're gonna have some of that, you know, and you can make that note in the PCD.
Yeah, okay. The other thing that probably is gonna have to be in the PCD is a different home that I probably will be listing if we can find them a place to go. All the floors are Brazilian cherry, which are gorgeous, but they showed me that they faded, so when you lift up the rugs, they're darker underneath. And we're gonna have to disclose that, right? Would you like offer some kind of concession? Because people are gonna say, well, if I can't keep all your rugs, then these floors are gonna look terrible.
Right, right. So you could offer a credit or something in the same way that somebody would if the carpeting in the house was trashed, you know, a flooring credit, basically. And you could put, if it was my listing, I would put in a note that says, because of the nature of Brazilian cherry, you know, the floors have faded, you know, where they're not covered. And sellers are willing to negotiate a flooring credit. You
Would
know,
you even
to have
bring
the
that
floor,
up in the beginning?
to have
Would
the
you
floor
just wait for the
redone.
agent? That
I have disclosed it before, because you can, I mean, in this case, you probably can't see it, but when you have like carpet that's trashed, I definitely put it in. Yeah, Kim, you were gonna add to that?
I think in a property like this, the more upfront you can be about things, the better, because it's one of those things like, well, if she didn't tell me
Tell me
about the
this.
floors, then what
Right.
else isn't she telling me in such a unique property? So I would just, if I knew personally, but I would rather.
Yeah.
I would rather,
These are two
ask for permission than forgiveness always, so that's just me,
That's
but
how
I
you
would just,
operate.
yes, it is.
I showed properties too that had issues underneath the carpet, and when you walked in, they had the carpet turned up.
So you could see
You
it.
walked in and you saw
Yeah.
it, like, right away.
And here's the thing, I think in our market right now with sellers, there's no reason why you wouldn't wanna put things out there that give the buyers confidence that you have given them all the information, because you want them to bring their best offer, right? You want hopefully multiple people to bring their best offer, right? And so that's another reason why one of the other things about paperwork, which we may or may not even get to, is that our franchise agreement with the home warranty. That's one of the things I do say to sellers right now, because buyers are so readily waiving inspections. If you as the seller decide that you are willing to or would be interested in providing a 1-year home warranty, what that says to me as a buyer is these guys are confident in their property and they're willing to cover anything that might come up in the first year that on this list of, on the list of protected things. And I've had more sellers decide to offer that, and actually twice now. It's crazy, it's happened twice. It covers the seller during the whole time it's listed. 2 of them have gotten new dishwashers. 2 of my sellers have had their dishwashers go out during the course of the listing, and it's been replaced with the home warranty. So, but it's just like, have that much pride of ownership in our property that we're willing to offer this to a buyer kind of thing. So rather than have it look like, oh, well, they think there's problems, it's like, no, we're doing this because we're that confident in the condition of our property, and we want you to be confident waiving that inspection, because we know you're gonna have to, and bringing us your best offer, so I think, from that perspective, I think disclosure is, I think, important in the sense that when I see a PCD that has a few things noted, I feel like, oh, okay, great, they're being honest about what's going on with this property, because how many properties have issues that never even come up on the disclosure, that probably should, right? And then you find out later, or maybe you don't even care because you didn't put an offer in it, but it's like, it's rare for every single property to have nothing that should be on that disclosure, and how many times do you pull it up and it's barely even filled out half the time, some of it, I mean, it's crazy. So I don't think that is I wouldn't think that is an issue that's gonna be a huge concern to people. I mean, if they're willing to offer some sort of credit for redoing the floors, I think now if they're saying, it is what it is, I still think they should disclose it, but it's also not, that makes it a little less easy to.
Yeah, just the cost of having a 3,300 square foot
Yeah.
house redone, 'cause it's
A lot.
all cherry, all
Yeah.
on the first floor.
Yeah, and here's the thing, credit doesn't mean we're covering every dime.
Right.
Credit means we're willing to put some money towards what that's going to cost,
Yes.
right? So that's why I say, don't make it a concession, and don't make it a full, necessarily covering the full cost of whatever that
Right.
is, because here's the thing, they could put rugs over it too. And not do it if they
The
should,
sellers would probably leave the rugs.
or have the sellers leave the rugs, right?
Yeah.
So there's, What other questions?
I have
Yeah, you have a bunch.
So, I'm flirting with AI photos, which is a pretty easy question, right? But AI photos into the MLS, you need to remark that photos have been digitally
Mhm.
staged. So sometimes I feel like I see ones that look like they're AI, but it doesn't say anything about it being AI, so I just wanna
Yes,
make sure that's.
anytime something's virtually staged or digitally enhanced or whatever, that way you need to disclose, yes.
And then, changes to the MLS after an accepted offer. Right now, so I had a comparable property. I went, saw the open house, whatever, talked to other agents, it's like apples to apples. Offers were due yesterday. I was looking for the listing, it's not, whatever, I kind of dig a little bit. On that particular listing, the fact that they had delayed negotiations offers due is different, the price has changed, isn't in there anymore.
Mhm.
And the price is lowered 20%, so I'm guessing that they didn't, get an offer accepted and they lowered the price, but don't you have to keep. Do we have to keep disclosed in the MLS that there was delayed negotiations and showings even,
Not that I'm aware of, we remove ours.
you can take
Do
it
you know
out.
something different than that? Yeah, I believe you can take it out. If you've passed delayed negotiations, you can remove the remarks, you can remove the form.
I think you're actually supposed to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, we've always removed
If
ours,
it goes past.
so. Yeah, I've never heard that.
And then in what order you can accept the offer, right? You
Mhm.
got your house, you can accept the offer. There's under contract, pending.
Mhm.
What order do you personally go, like the 3
Okay,
days?
so I'll write this down for Ken in the back row, like, notes.
I'm a visual person.
I know, so, okay, so we have active. Which is when it's on the market. C would be. You could change it to C, well, you should change it to at least C, after you have an accepted contract. If it has any contingencies. So if you're waiting on attorney approvals, if you're waiting on an inspection. Cause that happens occasionally. If you have any type of contingency, right? So you can change it to C. Not mortgage contingency, that would be the caveat to that, right? Then, you would be under contract. In theory, under contract, and only subject to mortgage commitment.
So that would be, you would move it to you typically
Mhm.
when you have attorney approval.
Yes, yep, so. For mortgage commitment, pending would be once you have mortgage commitment and you're waiting to close. So that's the standard. Not everybody does that, but that's the standard.
And you kind of
So,
put it in you
um,
if your seller doesn't want to show the house anymore, right?
Yes, so if your seller says, I'm done showing, I'm happy with my offer. Even though we don't have attorney approvals, you can go straight to. You. So we're waiting for mortgage commitment on this one. This is attorney approval, really, for. Inspections. So. Yeah, so here's the thing, you're gonna have people, this is where it gets sticky. Is, or, this one, it's when it's under contract and the agent hasn't changed it. Because they're still wanting to get the deeds off of that listing, right? And that's why the board has cracked down on it, and if you run into that, you can call the board. Or you can flag the listing online, and it is, anonymous, like.
Yellow triangle.
Forgot that word. Yes, it is anonymous if you do that. So the person that has the listing won't know that you were the one that blew it in, but if you call and find out that it's under contract and, most of the time I give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Because sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, we just got the contract signed last night. I haven't had a chance to change it, or my admin's changing it and she hasn't changed it yet, and it's a matter of within a day's time. But if it's 3 days later and it's still sitting there with active status, you can absolutely say that's, it's not okay. So, yeah, so that's why the board did that, because people were keeping them active for so long, because they want the leads. What else you got?
So every time I go to put in my paperwork on a listing, I have done one in a while, I had a couple last year, 4 last year. Have all the paperwork ready, then there's the MLS. Sheet, and then you put it in, so I know it auto fills. So that you don't go through and like click and, fill in all the
Oh, right.
paperwork.
Mhm.
But I always get nervous about how I just wanted a reminder of like how that works.
So you're saying autofills.
It autofills from the listing, like when you're putting your, I believe, like when you're putting your listing in the MLS.
It autofills when you click when you start your listing, you can click the box that says you're gonna fill from taxes or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but and absolutely do that, but always check that information, cause sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it'll have not the right number of bathrooms or, you know, whatever, like sometimes that is different.
But doesn't that make it live right away? I think I've run into that problem where I've had that autofill,
I always get nervous.
but none of my attachments are in there yet.
Mm-mm. Autofilling is, at least the one I'm thinking of is when you're initially starting your listing. You're autofilling information and it doesn't make it live right away, so you still have to set it live.
No, it just says upload from Realist.
That's what,
Yeah.
thank you.
So when you
What is it called?
upload-
I have somebody doing that for me now, so I'm like.
It's just waiting till I have something.
I'm
gonna wait for the.
Yeah, spend a minute, I'm like, wow, okay, I've been doing that for a long.
There is a form that you can pre-fill out though, is that what you're talking about? There's like.
So there's
Maybe
two, right?
that's
There's
what-
one, and then there's one that the sellers have to sign.
Right.
And I know that like, so if you put
Oh,
that,
you're talking about the MLS input sheet?
yeah,
Maybe
Yeah.
that's what they're saying. I've never
Okay.
used it though.
So that's the data sheet.
The data sheet, but yes, you need it, but that doesn't automatically populate.
It doesn't, okay, I didn't know.
I've never seen that automatically populate.
So the data sheet will automatically fill out anything from Realist if you put the tax ID number
If
in.
you,
And you choose that box.
it will fill it in on that sheet, but it doesn't automatically fill it in, yes.
They won't like list your property.
No,
No, cause you have to get an R number first, and you have to
Yeah.
click
Yeah.
3 buttons before you even get that
Yeah.
far.
and it gives you lots of warnings before
Yeah,
you're
you show
listing.
you.
I know, it's like in red, check the dates. and
Gives
I'm
you
like, oh, yeah,
lots of warnings. In fact, and if you don't have all the pertinent information, it won't even let you set it
Uh-huh.
live. So it's not gonna,
3 times.
it's not gonna let you set a incomplete listing
Mhm.
live,
Mhm.
for
So
sure.
would you take that, fill it in with the tax?
The MLS input.
Yeah,
Mhm.
print it out and then go with that to your seller
Mhm.
and fill in the rest of the
Yes.
information?
That's usually, that has been our practice, is fill it in from taxes, verify what was filled in, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not filled in from the tax records. And so that's the information you get from your seller, or when you're either at the property with your seller, or you can talk through that on the phone with them if you want to as well. Did you have another question or two? You're done. Okay.
I think I'm done, thank you.
Anybody else have listing questions? I'm trying to think what else.
And what I just noticed, this spells income, which made me laugh.
Oh, yeah, we talked about the other thing to think about with listing paperwork, we were talking about the two-step process. I think one other thing I had on my notes related to that is there is our state requirement about agency, right? So in theory, that form is supposed to be completed at first substantial contact. So even if you're not having a seller fill out complete listing paperwork, the best practice is to have them sign an agency disclosure, and probably your fair housing disclosure as well. I find it interesting that sellers are much more likely, in my experience anyway, sellers are much more likely to be the ones that want to violate fair housing than buyers. They're always the ones that want to know details about, not always, but many times I've had them want to know details about the buyers that are making offers on their houses, right? There also, I've had ones that have asked if we can ensure that it's a certain type of buyer, because I really want my neighbors to have nice neighbors, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, unfortunately, we can't do any of that. So having that conversation up front is not a good idea. Yeah, Sharon.
So run into buyers that don't, or sellers that don't want their house sold to investment properties, Airbnb, that's not a protected class. I told them if it's, what I told, and I don't know if this is, what I told them is, if it's that important to you, then speak to the lawyer and see if you can have it as like a deed restriction, but you know.
Yeah, it is not a protected class, so if they get offers and they, you know, in theory. One of the things about the escalation clause form or the multiple offer form that I will send to Kim. It doesn't show the entire offer to everybody, right, or to Mr. and Mrs. Seller. In theory, we should be providing the entire offer. The reason for doing that paperwork or that spreadsheet is to break it down to the most important stuff, because when they get 6 offers or 8 offers and the offers are 25 pages or 30 pages of paperwork in, and then you get the agents that add the lead and all that stuff to it, and everything, every single disclosure or every single attachment that was on the listing, like these offers sometimes are 50 pages long, right? So the nice thing about the spreadsheet is it breaks it down to just what they need to know, but at the end of the day, they can know the name of the buyer, right? So if the buyer is XYZ Corporation,
I thought we could vet them as, as well as
They
you
may-
can, I like to be there for my open houses, just to kind of talk to people and get a feel for them, but.
Yeah.
There's also the box they have to check if it's gonna be used as a primary residence.
Yeah.
yes,
So
which not everybody does, but that is one way to
technically,
look.
that's,
Yes.
that's another way to vet that is
Yeah.
appropriate and legal.
Yeah, and there are people that, there are people that also say that. And then potentially would change their mind if they saw the price that came along with that offer. I mean, it's, I get it from a. I want my neighbors to have nice people living here and don't want them to have it, or I don't want this whole area to turn into Airbnbs, blah, blah, blah. Which is, who was you've got the one coming up in Middlesex. Is there short-term rental certificate transferable, or will they have to reapply for? That's the question.
That's a really good
To
question.
ask. So if you ever do sell a property that is an Airbnb, because they've been very popular, make sure that you're checking with the town. Because some of the municipalities are requiring that when the property changes hands, they're gonna have to reapply, and some of them have put moratoriums on Airbnb, it's not a certificate, it's a. Man, I'm a permit, thank you, I'm having a hard time with words today, what is wrong? Yes, so, yes, I didn't have enough, so, anyway, so yeah, so make sure that you're checking on that, especially for Airbnb, or, same thing, you guys have buyers, I know this is a listing class, but if you have a buyer that's interested in an Airbnb property, make sure that you're asking that question of the municipality. Cause some of them will say,
And the sellers might not even know, right?
Right.
You might have to call the town.
yeah, they may have no idea.
So sometimes it's renewable and sometimes.
Sometimes it's transferable and sometimes they're gonna say no, and they may say it's not transferable and, oh, by the way, we're not issuing anymore right now.
Okay.
So that's important for how you're gonna market that property.
Yeah.
Mhm. Anybody got any other listing related interesting things?
Okay, one more.
Okay.
A little bit of a musty smell in a house.
Mhm.
That is so spotlessly clean and was built in, it's like 18 years old. I mean, it's beautiful, well taken care of, custom built, little bit of a musty smell. Which I did not address. Kim and I talked about it. You need to get me that scent.
Fabuloso.
Fabuloso?
Yeah.
Oh, is that a cleaner?
That's a thing. So what do you think is the cause of it?
I don't know, the basement is superior walls, but they had some, like those bags that collect moisture down there. They have impeccable drainage around the house. The man is like facilities manager at a school, so he like knows all this stuff about the building.
And they live there, so it's
They
not
live
that it's been vacant. or
Right, well, they
anything like
don't
that.
live there in the winter, but.
Oh, okay.
Do they have a fan in their basement?
No.
A fan and a dehumidifier?
Yeah, they might just need to set up a couple dehumidifiers and.
Or even a fan if it's stagnant down there, moisture collects, it's gonna stay.
Permeate, yeah, it's amazing. We had some of them backed up in our basement and I got about 2 inches of water in my basement. And I'm still in the process of cleaning it out and it's amazing. I've gotten the majority of the big stuff. We've got the fans going and we have the dehumidifier and all of that. And it's amazing how the smell down there is like so musty and it never was like that. And I'm like, oh, gosh, I don't know if we're ever gonna get rid of this, aside from throwing everything away. Yeah, so that's definitely, and that is the smell that will carry, and you've all seen those commercials, like the air that you breathe in your house is primarily from what's going on in your basement, right? When they're trying to sell you on mold prevention or whatever it is on TV, right? But that's true, I mean, and that smell does carry up in the house, so if there is those moisture bags down there, that's probably where it's coming from, is the basement, so. I would say fans for sure, and then, you know, there's nothing wrong with a couple air freshener type things, plugins, whatever, like, you know, I have them at my house because I have pets and I don't want everybody that comes in my door to smell dogs, you know, and I don't smell it because I have dogs, you know. But so I don't, yeah, usually a couple of those isn't an issue, it's when you go into a house and like there's 25 and you're like, what's going on here? So. Anybody else got anything? What scent are you talking about, Kim? Is it something that you?
It's top secret, I don't know if I should share.
Top secret, such a-
I'm
You can't-
scarcity, not abundancy at the moment, I don't know.
It's such top secret that you can't remember is what you're telling us.
No, I think
It's in the Jason Hayes podcast, it was one of the agents that he interviewed.
Oh,
Carol
interesting.
Hugh, who heads up the luxury division.
Yes, oh, she has fancy product that she uses.
She does have a
Fancy.
fancy product that she uses.
Mhm.
It is the smell, it's a terrible name, so don't shoot me or be mad at me or anything. But the name, it is, tobacco and ember.
Ooh,
That's what she uses.
and it's what kind of, it's a product called tobacco and ember?
It's like a.
That's the
Or that's the scent.
The candle
Okay.
scent. Yeah,
Oh, it's a
and so
candle.
that's- Talk about a curated experience, they use that scent, she uses that candle and that scent.
At all.
Every single one for this,
Yeah.
but that's their signature
Yeah.
scent.
Yeah.
They did market research and they.
That's a real thing though.
Yeah.
It is a real thing that people do that, and that's a.
Yeah,
Cool.
Jason Abrams calls it the rich people scent.
Sure.
So, for what it's
Tobacco
worth.
and ember.
Yeah,
They got in a spray before a listing appointment.
yeah, yeah.
Luxury.
Luxury. Sorry, kick off my Reeboks.
That's funny.
Yes, it is the most beautiful, elegant, happy scent, and it's very understated, so there you go.
Thank you.
Wow.
Welcome.
It's on Amazon.
You guys do some of your own, I have no idea.
Now you're getting muddled, your branding's gonna get muddled with, whatever her.
Everybody's house is gonna have the same scent.
Yeah, now all of a sudden, it's not gonna be luxury anymore.
It's the key place.
1800 listening to Waterloo.
there you go.
Just-
Yeah, all of those scent things are great, and just. Again, being a little bit cautious with too much of it, because. Too much of it, people could have the question about what you're hiding.
Yeah. Or like a headache.
Yeah, well, some people are very opposed to that too. That's why I think this tobacco and ember is probably a little bit more mild. Understated, oh, thanks, understated.
That's what Carolyn said.
So it's amber, not amber. Amber. People thinks it's amber.
Ember,
Amber, yes.
All right.
It's amber.
Yeah, it means spice so funny.
I don't think we need anything else here.
Yeah, I met Uncle Jim.
Hey,
He was fantastic.
I'm glad that you connected with Uncle Jim.
Who
He's
is
coming in to
Uncle
teach
Jim?
class, you know.
Who is Uncle Jim?
Oh, you know Uncle Jim.
Yeah.
Oh, the Wurtenberg,
Yes,
is that his name? Yeah,
he's next Tuesday.
we use
Is that
him a
right?
lot on our team,
You're
so.
not on the guy.
I'm coming to it. And I
You are welcome.
Yeah, it's the 13th, I
Um,
believe, Tuesday.
And
I guess infection.
Inspections, what to look for, what to be on the
Yeah.
lookout for, what to keep an eye out for, how to best help your